So, many Sundays we have noted world events that are bringing purification. Actually, in a number of places, in this past year, there have been the largest wildfires in history. And now there are large surges in COVID-19 and turmoil of many kinds. But have you noticed that the intensifying purification is not just happening out there in the world, but it's happening in our own lives and consciousness? I've noticed. So when things are not going so well, it's a clue that purification is needed. In my service a few weeks ago, I spoke about seeing things as evolving, not bad. Instead, we can begin to see how God's creative process is working to change things, including how we see things. Recently, when I saw some things that were not going so well, an important realization came. I realized I had not been seeing the situations through the eyes of God. How we see things is our first act of creation. Most people see things through the wounds, rolls, and clouds of their human consciousness, including us. But what we see through the wounds, rolls, and clouds is not really true. We only see truly when we see through the eyes of God. Does that seem too high to reach? Well, it is actually seeing through the eyes of our true being, instead of from our many roles and painful memories. So today, let's take a step to see through God's eyes. Instead of seeing through the eyes of a lover rejected or a friend betrayed, we can choose to see through God's eyes. Instead of seeing through the eyes of a person abandoned or oppressed, we can see through God's eyes. Instead of seeing through the eyes of a friend ignored or a person unacknowledged, see through God's eyes. Through what eyes do we see ourselves? Through the eyes of a critic that frequently reminds us of our failures? Or of a judge that condemns and doesn't forgive? What do we see through those eyes? It's painful, isn't it? But it's not true. It's an illusion we have created through our wounded self. Have you ever thought about the fact that when you feel hurt or disappointed by someone, it's a wonderful opportunity to start seeing things through the eyes of God? In my early 30s, I had a beautiful dog I named Ginger. Her fur was the reddish-brown of ginger, and her nose and even her eyes. I loved that dog like my child. And as I pondered the pain that I felt from different people in my life, and how that had closed my heart, I thought, well, at least with my dog, I can keep my heart totally open. But one day, I saw her chewing on a bone that I thought was dangerous for her. So I took it from her mouth. And guess what happened? She bit me hard. Later, after dressing my wound, I noticed my heart was closing even to my dog. That was very interesting, because I saw the same thing happening in me with my dog as when I felt hurt by people. I knew very well that my dog did not want to hurt me. It was her instinct to bite. But I noticed that my interactions with her were not from the same open heart I had experienced before. So I had to heal my heart even with my dog. And that showed me that the work of healing my heart was primarily in my own consciousness. The approach I had relied upon with people clearly would not work with my dog. I could not sit down with my dog and work things out in a conversation. So when we open to see people and circumstances through God's eyes, it calls us into true being. When we stop seeing people and things through our roles in human identity, it moves us into the freedom of divine identity. So how can we start seeing people and things and circumstances through the eyes of God? So I'll tell you how it works for me. The first step is I realize that seeing people and things from my role or wound is simply not true. The second step has two parts. So the first is throw out all self-active strategies. These are strategies like Eugen described last Sunday, unnatural, artificial, calculated, and willful. Throw out even strategies based in good intentions, like how to be a good wife, a good friend, a good mentor, etc. Throw out all those strategies and focus on one thing, aligning with God's spirit and law. So this is the second part of step 2. Ensure that my spirit is true and that my action harmonizes with the one law moment by moment. Give according to the response that's present and give my true nature. Actually, this is much easier than trying to figure out what strategies will work. It's also easier than trying to hold my expression to some concept of how I should be. So, perhaps as I continue speaking, you'll understand that aligning with God's spirit and law is not some concept of how I should be. Perfect. So, if I slip up and don't express my true nature, no big deal. Just realign again and look again. What does the law of love impel me to do now? And now. So, as you start practicing this, you may find that you can see some people through God's eyes, but not others. Those that are hardest to see through God's eyes are those we have expectations of. Our husband, or wife, or lover, our parents, our mentor, even our children now. So, especially those we hold in high regard, we tend not to see them through God's eyes, but the eyes of expectation, judgment, disappointment. Why not see those we hold in high regard, especially those through God's eyes?